So hi everyone, my name is Beth. I work at Microsoft as a software engineer. I work for the organization is called PAX. It stands for Partners, Analytics, and Essential Experiences. We work kind of in this partner ecosystem to help unblock our partners, whether it's for Windows or for Graph, also our communities to solve some of the engineering problems that comes along. So the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is one of the toolings that we decided to build actually based on our community ask. So once upon a time, there were 5, 6 different authentication flows that you can follow to connect to the graph. And that has been raised as one of the top obstacles that comes along when people try to work with Microsoft Graph. So we built the toolkit. Originally started with a single component called MGT login to help solve that kind of problem, and it kind of just expanded into other web components. So what is the Graph Toolkit? It's a collection of framework agnostic web components powered by the graph. So these components are actually functional components, which means when you drop the HTML tag in your front end, it automatically connects the graph and does all the magical codings behind the scenes and handles the authentication flow if you want it to be. And it also works with any web framework and on most of the modern browsers. We've been trying to solve a lot of IE11 bugs recently. So who's it for? It is for any developer that's building web apps, team tabs, SharePoint web parts that calls the graph. Here is why we think you should use it. First and foremost, it is very simple to add the toolkit to your projects. It only takes just a few lines of code, and I'll show you here just in a minute how easy it is to get the authentication piece wired up into your web application. So it's going to save you a lot of time and help you just get to the point that you really like into your development mode. The second thing is it's very flexible. Like I said, it works with all the modern browsers. We support almost all the web frameworks or any web frameworks, just because that we designed this with the cross-platform in mind. The reason that we wanted to do web components at the beginning was because, instead of taking the approach where Microsoft has taken a stand of going with, a lot of projects went with React, is because we think that it'll be easy for developers to make that choice themselves. You don't have to switch your framework in order to use our components. We also have wrappers to help you build, inside of your framework, such as MGT React. But at the same time, if you want to use Angular or Vue or just plain HTML JavaScript, you could totally do that. The other aspect of flexibility is the customization ability to the toolkits. We offer the toolkits in the state where it looks and feel, where the look and feel is like the M365 components. So if you're using it out of the box, it'll just look like any of your Microsoft products. But we made it super easy for you to customize it from using JavaScript or CSS custom properties in order to fit it into your own design and your own style. Last but not least, our project is a open source project. So we are welcoming any issues and PRs from the community, and we hope that there's more people coming helping us after all these talks. So let me just show you real quick what I mean by it only takes a few lines to add the toolkit into your project. And I'll also show you how to register your application with Azure Active Directory, because that was one of the most prompt question people always say, oh, why don't you show us how to register that in the Azure portal so that we don't have to tackle that ourselves. So I'm going to go to my terminal. And here, I'm just going to put it down a little bit. I have a folder created called .NET North. I don't really have anything but like one little sample in there that I'll show you guys later. So what I'm going to do is just going to create a folder, MGT simple, and cd into that folder, and then create a file called index.html. And I'm pulling up my Visual Studio Code with that one little file in there. So very simple. I'm just going to start by creating a, let me make this bigger real quick. By creating a, your default HTML page with some head body, and then I'm going to add a script tag right here. I'm surprised they didn't automatically. Anyways. So every time that you're trying to work with a graph toolkit or graph in general, a good place to look at our documentation and follow the steps would be, pull it up, aka.ms/mgt docs. So here's all the official documentation that describes how to use the Graph Toolkit, and you can find the Get Started guide, all the components, authentication providers that we have out of the box, which I'll talk here in a little bit, and then how to style them and templating them. So if I go to the Get Started page, I'm just going to grab this script tag real quick and put it right here. I guess I didn't have to create that, did I? Great. So 2 ways to include the MGT as a module into your project. If you're using simply a HTML page, you can just drop the script tag and this is going to fetch the package for you. If you're building this within React or a Node project, you can do an npm install at Microsoft/MGT, and that will get the package for you. So afterwards, now if I run this project, what's going to show up on the page is just blank, and you see the script getting attached. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the documentation and see, what are the simple things I can add to it. How about we just add a authentication component to our project real fast? So one line, here's second and third line. And I'm going to go ahead and go create a client ID for my project so that you can see how it works all together. So I was trying to say, like, there are 4 different providers that we offer. There's MSOL provider, simple provider, SharePoint provider, and Teams provider. Oh, we also have proxy provider, I guess 5 of them. So these providers works behind the scenes to provide your application authentication methods to the Microsoft Graph. The reason we're using MSOL provider is because we're building a simple, web app. But if you're building SharePoint web parts, you can add your SharePoint provider. If you're building Teams tab, then you can use the MGT Teams provider, and there's documentation out there. If we have enough time, we can talk about that more later, but we'll see. So back to creating a client ID. So I'm just going to go to my portal. So this is the Azure portal. I'm signed in. I'm just going to hide this real quick as one of my demo tenants. And then I'm going to search. Oh, maybe I should make this bigger too. Cool. Let me know if you guys can't see or anything. I'm just going to search Azure Active Directory. And then under app registrations, I'm going to add a new registration. And say this is for .NET North. The tenant types are interesting choices based on your application needs. So single tenant means, only people in your organization or company can access it, and there's multi-tenant. There's also, you can include both AD and MSA for your personal account. Just for the simplicity, I'm going to create one with like everything included so everybody can, log into my application. But if you want to configure this, there's also parameters that you can add into your JavaScript in order to define these things. And again, you can find those in our documentation. So what I'm going to do is add the redirect URL here. Localhost, I think it was just HTTP. I need to ask localhost 5500. So this is, I'm going to use the live, what's it called? Live server within Visual Studio Code, and that was the default port. I already know what it is. But if you're building your application and you know it's like localhost 3000, make sure that you write the right port in here. Click register. Here it is. This is my basic AAD registration app with the application ID, directory ID, and all this good stuff. Under redirect URL, there's also other things that you can configure, such as your logout URL if you decided to do some clear caching or whatever, other things that you needed to do. Here's something that you should pay attention is to enable implicit grant. If you're using access tokens or ID tokens like we do, these are the boxes you need to check accordingly. I think that's about it. I'm gonna go save it. And there are other things here that would be interesting according to your needs. For example, you can upload certifications or generate secrets in order to make your application secure. You can pre-configure the API permissions that connects to the graph if you're using application permissions. We're using delegation permissions where our application just going to ask on behalf of the user what permission that we needed to connect to the graph so they can consent to it accordingly. So I'm not going to do anything else. So that's it. Now I'm going to go back to overview, grab the application ID, come to Visual Studio Code, put the ID here, and save it. And like I said, I'm just going to go right here is where I have the Visual Studio, live server, and the port says 5500 at the bottom right. I don't know if you guys can see this. I forgot to turn on my the mouth tracking thing. So here, let me go to localhost 5500. This has been happening to me lately, probably because that I have cache. Sorry, I'm just gonna open up a new incognito browser. I think the 431 errors because like Node has a limit for header length. Anyways, so here I am. Localhost 5500. We already added the MSOL provider and a login component. Here's my login component. I'm just going to log in real quick. And like I said before, it'll ask for permissions for the login component. It'll only need, the profile read and all the data access. So I'm just going to click accept. Ta-da! My face is there. And you're connected to the graph. And we've had written 3 lines of code. So no more complaining about graph permissions and authentication because we made it so easy for you. Anyways, so something else that we can do, I'm gonna switch out this client ID because I wanted to use something that I've been working with for a while so that all the permissions are set up. So bear with me as I switch it out to one of my more well-known client IDs, but you know how to create it now, you can just do it yourself. So now that I've added a login component, what are the other things that I can do? There's agenda component, which will show you your calendar events, and you can add things like group by day by supplying a attribute telling it that I wanted my events to group by the dates. You can also give it like how many days that I wanted to show, for example, 5 days, or you can do something like I wanted to show it from today. So today is July, double check, 21st, 2020. We'll see how this goes. So my server is still running. I'm gonna go back here. And like you can see, it already automatically pulled all the events from my calendar, starting from the date that I specified and grouped them by dates. And you can see today and tomorrow because those are the only sample data that I put in there. But if I changed it to maybe, what was the last Friday, 17th? I think I have another thing on there for the 17th. There it is. So here's all the information. And as I said before, the magical things about these components are they all come with CSS properties already, so it kind of looks like a Microsoft product. And here's another component that came with agenda component, which is called the person component. When you hover over it, it'll show you this person's some details about them. This is my boss's kid, their name, contact information, and photos and stuff like that. And this is a famous Nicola on there. Anyways, coming back, that's how simple it is to get started and add the Graph Toolkit, Microsoft Graph Toolkit into your project. I'm gonna stop the server, go back to my presentation, and moving on. So what are the components that's available other than the two that I already showed you guys, the login component and agenda? And these are some of the components that we built. And I will go into details here in a minute because we built this playground for people to explore all the components we have. So it's kind of like a showcase place where you can play with the components, but also you don't have to have a set of data or your tenant or all this registration. You can just go in and see them right away because we have a test tenant set up for this. Kind of like Graph Explorer if you've already worked with Microsoft Graph before. We're working on getting a sign-in component ready so that people can, you can use your own tenant data, but that's gonna come in a future release. I'm gonna click it real quick. Here is, actually, I want to show this in a different browser. Let me just pull up my Edge again. Close this guy. Open a new tab. Go to mgt.dev. So this is a playground for the toolkit. And on the left, excuse me, you can see a list of components that's available to you today. And if you expand them, there are some samples came with them to showcase, different capabilities that each component has. So starting from, I'm going to start from MGT people, come back to Get later on because we already talked about agenda and login. So MGT people shows a group of people that you interact with. This is using the people API from Graph. And when you hover over these little bubbles, it'll show the person card component, which comes next. There's a couple things that you can add to your MGT people by supplying some properties, HTML attributes, such as how many people that you want to show. If I change this to, I don't know, 8, it's probably going to change it for me to show more people. You can supply a group ID directly within HTML in order to get these people from this group that you find. Or you can give it user IDs for each person that you would like to show as people's. People query works kind of the same, like user ID, just different query parameters that you can provide. MGT person is the next one that I wanted to show. This is something like if you provide a query and show how you want it to look like, this will show you like some basic information like the image, the person's emails, and their names. We have this guy that shows you all the different ways that you can display a person, MGT person as a component. And the next thing I'm going to show is person card, because that's what, when you hover over or click the MGT person component or people component, this is the next thing that shows up. Just a little bit more information on, it looks like the Outlook card or your Teams card where you can deep link into chatting with someone, emailing them, or like looking at their detailed information. We've recently introduced a new feature, the presence icon, onto our all the components that uses MGT person. So now you can add your coworker's presence in a way that shows if they're available and complete your workflow from there. If you want to see all the presence. Here's also one story under MGT person that will show you what different bubbles would look like when they're in different state. And there's some JS relates to it and setting up their states as well. So the next one is, I'm going to talk about MGT tasks real quick. We're working to revamp this right now to split up the functionalities of Connect to Planner and to-dos. So this is going to slightly look different and a lot cleaner after our next release. MGT Channel Picker is also a new one, which we heard a lot of people wanted to complete their workflow within a Teams environment. So if you use the Teams auth provider and add this into your Teams tab app or whatever, you can select the teams and the channels that are connected to the person who's signed in and pick whatever channel that they're in and then complete the workflow from there. Something else to take notice that I found very interesting is we started building out dark mode for people. So if you're building applications for darker themes, here's all the CSS that you can use to tweak your application. We built one for MGT Teams Channel Picker. I think we also built one for People Picker right here, dark mode. And we're working on creating themes for MGT, all the components next. So coming to the most powerful one, in my opinion, is MGT Get. We've gotten some feedback from people saying like, all of your components is very tightly coupled with a specific graph API endpoint. What if I just wanted to use your authentication mechanism in the backend, but also built my own component that way? So we created the MGT Get component where you can just make any get calls to the graph. And how you do that is you supply the Graph API endpoint as resource in as a HTML attribute within the get component. And then you define the version of the Graph API, whether it's beta or V1, give it the scope that it needed. And all this information you can find on the Microsoft Graph documentation. And another thing, I know that we're talking about the Graph Toolkit today, but another thing that if you're new to the graph that would be very nice to explore is called the Graph Explorer, where you can, play around with the demo tenant and then try out different endpoints and see what's the difference between beta and V1 and all that good stuff. So that's the playground, and we kind of covered all the components that the toolkit covers. Hopefully that helps with, more resources for people to go explore. Now I'm gonna go back to my presentation again, right here. Moving on. What time is it? 12:30. Okay, so already did that. I'm going to go through this very quickly. So if you have questions, maybe we can answer it afterwards. This is kind of digging deeper into how you would customize your MGT components with the HTML attributes, properties, and CSS. There's a lot of ways that you can do it. And for example, if I go back to the playground and go to person, and I just wanted to customize, one of this person card. Let me just do this real quick. And if I give it like an ID, say I think it was my component, and I have some code ready here. I'm just going to show you guys real quick. If I add JavaScript to it to attempt customizing this component where I get the component by getting the ID and then supplying all the information that I wanted to show instead of using the graph data, you could do that. Another thing that you could do is, like I said, this is using attributes versus JavaScript properties, which is person detail is the property that we're looking for. And these are all documented on MGT docs. If you want to customize the look and feel of these components, you can just add some custom CSS properties where all these // web components custom properties are predefined by our team, where you can change some things like subtitles, font size, or background colors, and to make it look differently. Okay, going back to presentation again. So we were on here. Like I said, if you have more questions, we can talk about this later. Templating is a big one. This is a HTML elements that kind of really revolutionize how you would write HTML code, so you don't have to repeat things that you would want to have like multiple times in your code. For example, in this one, we're retemplating what MGT agenda would look like by looking for the event data type and then taking all the JSON properties or cherry pick them out of the event JSON object and then supplying them into a MGT person component, and then having some sort of conditional rendering also with another layer of template showing like if there's an image, show the image. If there's no image, then we'll show the display name. So here. We have a couple templating examples for you in the playground as well. Down here in the sample section, if you open up templating, this one kind of shows you, if you want to show extra data on your person card outside of the graph data, here's a template that you can use to edit to the bottom piece. It's called additional details as a data type. And if you want to change the look and feel of how the agenda is rendered, here's another way that you can use templating to make it like a timeline of everything that's happening on your agenda, so forth and so forth. And there's a lot of things that comes with templating, such as like the OIDA parameters that you can use with a $sign in front of them, or conditional rendering for if-else type of situation. You could do looping for data 4 and pick, some, this is kind of like mapping JavaScript properties within, an object. And we're talking about MGT get and how powerful it would be to combining MGT get with templating to do, a lot of interesting things that you can imagine. So the next topic that I wanted to talk about is providers. And I kind of touched on this already. There are 4 or 5 different kinds of providers that we have. I'm going to stop this video. There's the MSOL provider that works with, your web app. Teams provider would determine the Teams environment and then does the silent authentication within Teams with all the pop-up and the goodies for you. And I have samples for these as well. If you're interested, please let me know afterwards. We can share this via email where I'll point you to the right documentations and samples that we have out there if you're building Teams apps or SharePoint apps. And then the proxy provider is something that I'm actually going to talk about today because later we have a sample for that, because that's something that the ASP.NET or .NET community has been asking for is, what if I already have my authentication backend connecting to the graph, login is already handled, how am I going to use your component in order to achieve what I wanted to do after that point? So I'm going to show you that in a little bit. And then there's also, you can create your own custom authentication providers as well. So now I'm going to do like a really quick, how to add MGT in your .NET Core project. So coming back to here. And I'm going to create a directory called .NET Core. Maybe just follow MGT .NET Core and go into it. I think this is how you do it. No, apparently not. I don't remember them. Okay, I'm in my directory where I'm just going to do, if you're familiar with the .NET Core SDK, I'm just going to do .NET new MVC. This is going to create a new MVC project for me using the .NET Core SDK. As you can tell that I'm not coding in Visual Studio, so you don't really need Visual Studio for this. So I'm just going to open up my VS Code. Also, I'm going to close this one so I don't get confused. Make this full screen. So this is just your boilerplate MVC version of a .NET Core project, which it comes with, you know, your default home controller, some models, and within views is what we're going to work with today for this project. So let's just look at like some of the stuff that already includes. So settings kind of tells you, you know, logging information, and I think there's also, I guess that's it. Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna pull up the console here as well and check my node version. 14.5.0. Just bear me for 1 second. I just want to switch to the right node version before I do something within this batch. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just do a .NET run to restore all the dependencies that I needed, and then show you that what the default project looked like. So it's going to go to here. It always picks a different browser as I want it to be. I thought I set it up differently. Anyways, localhost 5001, and I want this to be HTTPS. Okay, cool. There it is. There's my ASP.NET Core projects that I just created. So what I'm going to do next is just setting it up a little bit, going to, you know, the home view index, and I have some code ready. Don't judge me. I don't have enough time to type all this out, so I prepared it. So I'm going to remove all this stuff which shows, you know, the welcome page, and then just give it like a content for column 1, 2, 3. And what I'm also going to do is give it some CSS so it doesn't look so ugly. In www's root, I'm going to go to set CSS. Go down to the bottom, all my CSS that I want it to be. Okay, cool, done. What's the next step? If you remember when we were doing just the index page, similar here, all you need to do is drop the script tag, give it an MSOL provider, create your client ID, and drop the login, and then you're done. And I'm gonna go get my client ID again and add it right here. And bear with me, I don't have the watch function, so I'm just gonna run it again. So .NET run. Now if I go back to my web page, refresh it, you see right here, this is the login button again that I showed you guys earlier. And because my browser already logged in once with my profile here with Edge, that's one of the most fancy things about Edge Chromium, in my opinion, is the ability to switch profiles, so I don't have to have like 5 different incognito windows open anymore. Anyways, I'm logged in here for, you know, your .NET Core project, 3 lines of code again. And similar, if you want to do, you know, MGT, let's try a different one, tasks, how about that? And I have to restart this. Go back here, refresh. Now it's going to show me, you know, the list of tasks that I have in my planner. I'm just going to show you real quick. Also, I was going to add this to here. And the reason that I'm doing this is I actually stole the sample from one of our used to be community members, now part of the team. Aisha, so props to her. She wrote a very nice blog post about this, and I was reading this the other day, and I thought that I'd try out the sample that she has in here. It goes into details to explain the things that I kind of just showed you. So, but if you're interested, here's another sample. I can send the link later to you guys as well. So anyways, coming back to my Visual Studio Code, the other sample that I wanted to show you is how to add this MGT-get component into your project. So in the second column here, you can see ID number 2. I just added an MGT-get, and in a resource, it used to be like me and mailboxes, and then I decided that I only wanted to get mailboxes from my inbox. So I went to Graph Explorer and grabbed the ID of my inbox, and then added here, and then gave it a version. Scope is just mail rate. And the paging mechanism helps me with, you know, going through different pages of my very busy mailboxes. And then down here in the templating section, you can say if there's too many emails, then I want it to be in loading state. And if there's error, I was going to show the error. If not, I just want to show the subject and some body preview. So if I save this, again, redo .NET Run. Coming back to my browser, make it refresh. Here now I have 3 different columns of things that I wanted to show in my dashboard per se. To the left is all the events that's going to come up. In the middle is kind of like all the inbox emails that I need to take care of. On the right side is all my tasks that I need to pay attention to. So here in, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, you kind of have your personal dashboard built out that's connected to the graph, shows all the information that you needed to know. I know we're running out of time, but I'm just going to show I think the proxy provider is actually very important for the .NET community. So I'm going to go through the code real quick for that one as well. Hope it's okay. Coming back to my terminal. Here it is. I can't multitask. When I'm talking, I can't figure out which icon I'm going for. Anyways, so let me just cancel this process so my computer stops screaming at me. So I'm going to go to the MS Graph training project. This is a very good resource for if you're an ASP.NET Core or .NET Core developer and you wanted to learn how to begin to connect to the graph. Here is all the tutorials for graph. And then I just came in here, grabbed the ASP.NET Core, get started, and download it. That's all I did. So what I did next was, let me close this one. What I did next was in the in the layout page, I attempted to add, because this is shared across different views, I attempted to add a script that will set the provider to be, authentication provider to be the proxy provider after I added the MGT bundle. So this is the only thing that you need within your HTML kind of environment to set up your providers. And now the other thing that I created is called proxy controller. So what this does is it uses the default client right here. So it gets the graph client from the client factory, which is created as a helper to connect to the graph already, which I would imagine that you have this already in your code because you already handled all the graph authentication by yourself. So at this point, all I need to do is initialize a graph client and use this to compare all the different calls that you have between your front end and your back end, and then using this as a proxy to make calls using the Graph Toolkit. And the reason that I created the proxy controller is because a lot of people ask us, we don't want to pass the tokens between our back end and front end. It's not very secure. But I also wanted to use, my own mechanism of authentication because I already read all that code. I don't want to just throw it away, but how do I incorporate some of the components from MGT that you already have it ready? So this is our kind of like meet in the middle solution to help you get MGT component in your front end. So the other thing that I added is in the index homepage here. I've added 2 things. MGT person is kind of an example of if you don't want the MGT component to call the graph, you just want it to use your, the data or models that you already set up in your own .NET Core project. For example, here's the function that I grabbed from one of the graph helper, I think one of the, it's in the claims principal extensions. Where I'm just going to say, like, here's the username that I wanted to use for this MGT person query. And then after you already have all this information, I'm going to do like all the other stuff that I have, all the attributes that I can supply to my MGT component. The other thing is I also added an MGT agenda component, which will just go ahead and call the proxy provider and then call the graph and then get all the data for me using the token that you already gotten from your own code and show what's going on here. So I'm just gonna run this real quick. Similar, I'm gonna write directory, yes. .NET run. This is gonna happen. Okay, no worries. I've got a lot of different things set up in my local machine, so I was just gonna do terminal. Hopefully this is gonna work. Oh, because I'm not in the project. Demo and then graph tutorial. It's just 2 layers into that folder. And now I have a solution file and all the startup CS and all that crap. I mean, all the stuff. And then I can do a .NET run. Cool. And now if I go to, you know, you always want to go to the HTTPS one because that's where the IIS is actually hosted. And then in my browser, I'm gonna go here. Put in the URL. Now it's gonna ask me to sign in. There you go. So the default project, it used to be just this bar, and this part is using msalt.net to handle authentication in your typical .NET Core or .NET projects. And then these are the 2 components that I actually added with the proxy provider and the proxy controller added to the project. I know that I run through this super fast, but if you have questions, like I said, feel free to ask. And now you can see, you know, my presence. If I actually log in here and change my presence, maybe go to Teams, just to show this is live. Logging in real quick using the web. And change this to not disturb. How about that? And go back and refresh. Here it is. So everything is live from graph data. Cool. That's all the demos that I have. A couple more slides and then we're done. Sorry, I feel like I'm running out of time a little bit. So here's the roadmap that we've had ever since we actually released this last year during Ignite. So those are the components that we created before. And then over time, we've introduced more things heavily based on community feedback. So your feedback really matters to us. So if you want to create, you know, issues on our GitHub repo, we will very much like to hear about them. We're planning for the 2.0 release right now. We actually just went through our Microsoft planning cycle. The 2.0 version is going to come out probably around September again, where we're going to do a revamped version of the person card to include so many more information, such as your recently shared files, your chat history, things that's important to you, you know, more personalized information, that sort of things. We're also looking at splitting up our packages into core and beta packages so that if people are using this in production, then you can only use the core packages. You don't have to touch the beta packages for Graph. We're introducing theming for dark theme, light theme, themes, maybe high contrast, maybe. Again, that's something that we'd like to know. What are the information that our community wants? A big thing that community has been asking us is how do I implement front-end caching? By taking a stand on this, we're kind of changing our component library into kind of like a framework, because caching technically is not part of a component thing. But if you would like this, we're planning on implementing this and would like to hear more about it. Polling, kind of already done. Extending components is a new feature that we wanted developers to really start building their own components, so you don't have to bound to all these components that we built for you. Our backlog on GitHub has a lot of information on our project goals, milestones, things that's planned, things that's in the works. If you want more information about anything about our projects, our GitHub would be a good place to check it out. Here's all the additional information. I showed you today the playground at mgt.dev, documentation at akms/mgt-docs. The GitHub repository is just at mgt, aka ms/mgt, and you can ask MGT specific questions on Stack Overflow. Just tag us as MGT Microsoft-Graph Toolkit. The last thing that I wanted to point you guys to, if you're new to the toolkit, is since April, we started a new blog series, and we had about 15 articles that went really into details on each topic, from, what are the different parts of creating your AAD, to adding your first components, to magical things that you can do with MGT Get, and how to customize. We go into details on each provider's how you want to do them, and we have 2 great samples showcase how to use MGT within React and how to use MGT within Angular. So this is a great place. It's called a lab around the Microsoft Graph Toolkit if you want to check it out and learn more about it. And most of them are coming from our MVPs and communities as well, that published together with our team. Cool. That's everything I have. I think I'm on time.